Welcome to Platemark. My name is Anne Shafer, and I am your host. You have found us at Platemark Series 2, A History of Western Prints. Today, True, Ludwig, and I are concluding our discussion of reproductive prints, at least for the early centuries, with a part 4 of reproductive prints. I described last time what a reproductive print is, but again, I'll just say quickly. An artist, say Raphael, creates an image, a painting. He hires another artist, Marcantonio Raimondi, to make a print of that image so that it can be shared far and wide. That's a reproductive print. We went on for 2 hours the night we recorded this particular conversation, and we're picking up right in the middle of it. We're moving from the Italian reproductive prints up to the northern climes, mainly Flanders and Holland. So we're jumping right into the middle of the conversation. It's a little awkward at the jump. That's what you do. Okay, buckle up, and here we go.
But the idea of spreading appearance of the mannerist, you have to give it to the reproductive printmakers. That's how mannerism gets out there. At the same time, it's not the only thing that's out there. I just wanted to take a look at our artists in the North. We're talking about reproductive prints that are made for different audiences. The Bayham brothers are making things. This is after the Reformation has begun. This is done about 1535, when much more is being done in terms of genre scenes and classical scenes and portraiture and natural landscapes and whatnot. The Bayhams give you this delightful view of a village fair, which is 14 inches by 45, made out of 4 blocks. And it still blows my mind because I do not think of the Bayhams as woodcut artists. I just don't. Never. But at the same time, they certainly wouldn't have made this if it wasn't a good seller. So it's chock full of all the Bayham-esque delightful things in it. Little views of the city, architecture, people playing sack butts. Ooh.
Over on the British Museum website, you can zoom in pretty tight and see all the good details.
And you'll be really lucky to see a guy who's had too much to drink and he's barfing, and people are dancing, and the wife is going to hit her husband with a board, and horses are galumphing off in the distance, and there's just a little boy that's climbing the pole, and it's just all of these slices of everyday life, the little birds that are flying out of the castle.
Is this like the Bruegel Town Fair?
Kind of, yeah, but this is 1535. It's 30 years earlier.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's that whole tradition. Oh, look, ugly. So there's all of these little snippets of daily life, which are really quite delightful. And yet, here we have this huge print, and obviously they know what they're doing. They're making this print. But check this out. A copy is made of it. This blows my mind. In reverse. Because this is by a guy named Debris, and he does an engraving of, and it's called the Little Village Fair. It's Debris after the Bayhams. And
it's an engraving by Debris after the woodcut by Bayham.
Yeah. And it's like this big.
It's half the size.
A third of the size. So it's much more home size. It's more portable. It's more ownable. It doesn't take up as much paper, but you could still have all the fun. Yeah. And I think it's fascinating to see it go backwards, to go from woodcut to engraving as a copy. But that love of the vignette, and giving the audience all kinds of little tales. So this goes all the way back to moments after the Reformation has begun, and this starting to really chronicle your daily life. And here's the big one for you, Anne. But my house is smaller, so I'm going to need a smaller engraved version. But mine also has some nice little subtitles.
Yeah, there's more text on this that might be more explicit. But in 1535 is 7 years after the sack of Rome. What was going on in the north during... The people sacking Rome were northern. Where's the army from?
Some of them were mercenary Germans. Okay. But they were fueled by Charles V of Spain.
Sure, okay. So what was going... But Charles V was trying to control Holland, the northern...
Yes, he was.
Regions.
And thank you for pointing that out, because that is a big issue. Here's another view of that. Another view. Engraved version of the Little Village Fair. Things that people would enjoy. The issue here is that what are they doing in the North? Well, they're starting to establish, in some places, a new form of Protestant worship. Europe is starting to get broken into two, and some of those northern countries are really going their own direction. Spain has its thumb on top of Flanders, which is going to stay Catholic. They're going to try and keep the Protestants down. This is all coming from a time of chronic warfare that would wage all the way through the 16th century. But to show the foibles of everyday life in the villages, there are clients that have the same kinds of tastes and wants of having, do I want a big one in woodcut, or do I want to get a little one in engraving? I think that the taste for prints has now become ubiquitous. It's not.
How does that work? It's not like there are journals circulating that say, are there?
I think they're, for instance,
The print dealers, a new profession, is now promoting this idea.
and the publishing houses.
Yeah.
You have the presses that are making books and all of those kinds of images. Don't forget that Durer's wife was the one that was packing his prints in barrels and sending them up to the Netherlands where he'd go visiting. And it was the Adam and Eve was one of his calling cards that he'd give out. The ability to carry these things back and forth is phenomenal. I think it would be delightful to study this even more and more. For instance, I know there are people who have probably spent their whole dissertation writing about the four winds and so on and so forth. But you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You've got these pieces of paper that get around and artists that understand it. I'm showing Anne another pair of images. I'm going back to the South again just because I'm there. But here I'm showing a progression of how etching starts to come into its own across the 16th century.
Oh, interesting.
That Dürer had done all of 6 etchings, but they were on iron and he hated it, so he never did it again.
So there's the Garden of Gethsemane there.
Yeah, Garden of Gethsemane. And then here we have an Entombment of Christ by Parmigianino, which he'd done like 17 etchings.
Which we talked about for quite a long time, about him being on that medical slab table.
Yeah.
Yeah, so bizarre, the Christ
But
figure.
you can totally see the Mannerist
Yes,
contortion
absolutely.
here. Now we're at the end, much more closer to the end of the century, and here's Federico Barocci, who has now really figured out how to manipulate biting time with etching. And being able to see etching being used to give you this beautiful St. Francis receiving the stigmata is a beautiful little print our students used to go bonkers over.
Yes, it is beautiful. And none of these are reproducing other compositions.
No, they are not. That's a great point. However, this Barocci, which is also an etching with some engraved touches, is a reproductive print.
The Annunciation.
After
Barocci, a print after his own painting of the Annunciation from 1582.
Which is stunning. Now you can again see how he manipulates. He understands how to put things, how long to get a short bite in the acid bath to get a certain
I
look.
think that these two must be like the most beautiful prints from the early part of the...
We had so many students fall in love
Oh,
with this
God,
print,
they're
but I
just
don't know
so
if you've ever
beautiful.
seen this.
Yes.
Have you ever seen them
I
compared?
think that
I never
known
did
that
it.
I had until I met you.
I never did it till today.
I think I found the painting for the episode we did on Barocci, but I don't know that we looked at it side by side.
Yeah, but just look how much better the print is.
Yes, the print, it just makes more sense.
It's just not that we're,
Biased or anything?
but if you look at, it's just so lovely and so different. And it has this, evaporates into light so much more adeptly. And that you start to understand, in this sense, here's an artist who understands how to translate what he was painting into a purely graphic mark. And that's unusual. Now, would we call this an autographic reproductive print? Yeah, I know, right? But it's interesting to see how beautifully this is accomplished. Now imagine yourself being a big hotshot painter like Rubens, saying, now I want to get my paintings out there, but who's good enough to do an engraving after my painting? So keep that in mind, because I think it's this kind of a pairing.
But Barocci really is the unusual one who can give us the...
You don't see this nearly as much. I'll point out later on
both the painting and the print.
that Rembrandt actually did a reproductive print after his self-reproductive after his painting, because he was watching Rubens and how Rubens was marketing his work. But it was only one of the very few times he did that. It just doesn't read. Just thinking about when Anne asks what's going on in the rest of Europe, the Protestant Reformation and how it's swallowing up the way people are going to think and worship in Germany and Switzerland and Holland and the Dutch Republic, what will become the Dutch Republic in Scandinavian England. But the Catholic Counter-Reformation trying to get its act together, and how is Italy and Spain and Flanders, which is a very vital power, which is nestled so close. This is as scary as anything I think of Civil War, Union versus Rebel, side by side in that tiny amount of space. That kind of battle for what we will be, I think it's really manifest in that. And so to see the kinds of artwork that will come about is fascinating. We mentioned the Garden of Earthly Delights once before. We were talking about my buddy Bruegel, but realizing that the
Garden of Earthly Delights is by Bosch.
by Hieronymus Bosch.
Clarity.
Yeah, thank you. And yet Bruegel is going to use Bosch's style because it already sells. It already makes sense. And yet Bosch has been dead for 40 years. And so then you have to ask yourself, is Bruegel Where is Bruegel getting these ideas? If we look at the kind of work that Bruegel is completely channeling the hideous creatures and beasties of Bosch and putting them out there so that we can see a St. Anthony in torment. We can see big fish eat little fish. We can see the world gone mad, which is the kind of print that you're seeing a great deal of. In this part of the century, it's the world is a difficult place. It'd be great if these guys were alive and doing what was going on in our world right now.
Yeah.
It's just so fucked up.
We're in the mid-1500s.
Yes. So here, about, let's say 1560.
Okay.
And we have Bruegel. This is great because we actually have the original drawing that Bruegel did, and he hands it off to the engraver, and the engraver is that craftsperson who will commit every line that Bruegel has drawn into a print. And
that's an unusual model too, right?
Eventually it becomes the norm, right? Because you find an engraver that gets it and can replicate your mark. Okay. So I just find it fascinating to think that Bruegel makes these. He's hired by Hieronymus Koch. Hey, I want to put these out there. Bruegel says, okay, here are the drawings. And Koch says, okay, I got the guy that's going to carve these for you. And it works. So for all of the deadly sins, we've got Peter van der Heyden that does it. For all of the good things, the 7 virtues, we have the other guy, Philip Gall, because they have a completely different appearance. You notice how much more classicizing and staid and stately the 7 virtues are. So
let's stop for a moment. Okay, so we've got Peter Bruegel's designs that have been captured by
Philip Gall.
Philip Gall in the sins, the 7 deadly sins. But can you just for a second, let's talk about the address, because
yes, please.
This is not the first.
This is wonderful. Great. Yes, perfect. Because this is where we really start to see it,
and where it becomes crucial to
very important. Absolutely,
what for where.
Exactly right. So the address. Now that. Thank you. See, this is our print curator doing exactly what print curators are supposed to do.
Keep soundtrack.
Good luck with that. Look, look, that guy's cutting open that fish with it. But the idea of the address is literally where it comes from, and it's across the bottom. In the case of these Peter Bruegels, it depending on what the audience was, the address may have the title in Latin for the erudite who could speak it and read it. It'll be in Flemish for those who can actually read Flemish. It'll list who drew it. It'll say who sculpts it. And it may even say who publishes it. And that then, of course, would be Hieronymus Koch and the Four Winds. And so the address is this fascinating strip across the bottom. And it's interesting here to notice that on the 7 deadly sins, by the way, that'd be anger, sloth, pride, greed, gluttony, envy, and lust, all the fun ones, and versus the faith, hope, charity, justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. Then on the sins side, it is printed, the address is in both Latin and in Flemish.
Oh, on the same print?
Yes.
You didn't get different versions of it.
But on the 7 virtues, it's only in Latin.
Whoa.
Because you silly little Flemish people can't possibly.
What did you call them? Flesh sacks?
Little flesh puppets, yeah. You couldn't possibly understand this. So only the smart people who can afford these prints would be able to understand it. So it's only in Latin.
That's a fascinating thing that because this, maybe it does happen. The idea that within singular country that there are these multiple different languages that will denote your class.
Oh, come on. Have you gone to East Balmerhorn? Come on. Have you gone to Daniation? Come on. What does somebody from the Midwest think when they hear some deep Southern drawl? It's absolutely place and place.
Human nature.
Absolutely. And this is really the first time you see the address this clearly. And I also enjoy it on the print Big Fish Eat Little Fish. Yeah. I love this because the dad is pointing out to the son. He says, "Eche, do you see?" Like Eche Homo. Do you see big fish eat little fish? It's fascinating to see how all of that happens. And so it's all here. It'll tell you which sin it is. Right. It'll say who drew it. It'll say who. You see H. Koch. He publishes it. And sometimes Philip Gall might be in there hiding someplace. Right. So it really gives you its pedigree.
It makes it much easier for future print curators like me who are in charge of cataloging these ridiculous things to everybody knows what you're talking about if you have the thing that Bruegel designed, that Koch published, that...
Because, exactly, the address is all part and parcel of that new publishing house concept of how do we put it out. Now that also brings up something that we haven't quite talked about, the concept of copyright, which is still being worked out. Copyright didn't exist when Israel van Mechenum was copying, air quotes, but it was just getting images available.
Durer did get the Venetian Senate to knock off.
Don't use my name. You can't put my name on it. You can't copy my stuff. So the whole concept of how do we establish copyright, it takes centuries to work out because that's completely new and we're still dicking around with it now. Then we also have here's a very interesting one that I came up with. Vieri's 9-foot wide landscape of Venice, the view of Venice. It was this patriotic version of what Venice was, and it's fascinating, and Venice is like flexing its muscles. We're wonderful. They actually give the copyright to publish that to a guy from Germany named Anton Kolb for 4 years. He has the privilege of being able to, he's a merchant from Nuremberg. He gets to publish it and sell it for 4 years for, what did I have? 3 ducats, free of taxation. He's in Germany. Why? Because this is a great way to show our 9-foot incredible bird's eye view of Venice. Beautiful. And he has permission to do that. And then we have to go on further. We talk about Ugo de Carpi, who wants to get the copyright on, I invented chiaroscuro woodcuts. And they're like, you did the Italian version of it. What was it? When he put petitions to Senate, he says, I've invented something quite new and never done before. Which is true because his look very different from the German ones. Okay, fine. But that idea of copyright, cum privilege, is something that Rubens will come to get very adept with. Anne and I have talked a good bit about what is more creative. Is it the reproducing of it? How much more it takes for the artist to do it? There was another wrinkle that how the unique physical object was less important than the creative concept that the object represented.
Wait.
Yeah. So here's a neat, okay. So here, this is all part and parcel of the new concept of what is print collecting and why do you want an image and how are you going to catalog that and store it? Is it an original print? Is it a reproductive print? What are we going to call it? Is the reproductive print being made to be able to communicate art theoretical kind of aesthetics and ideas? Is it there to, it's a really interesting point. This one from Holtz. It says that studies of print collecting from the 16th through the 18th century bear out de Grazia's point that the unique physical object was less important than the creative concept that the object represented. Reproductive prints are really useful ways of skilled interpretations of how artistic conceptions are made.
Wait.
It's like a primer.
So the reproductive print is a signifier of another thing, but not an object in itself, basically. Is that what that's saying?
Yeah. It's the idea that it represents is more important than the print itself.
Yeah.
And so here she goes, they existed alongside original prints without the condescending judgments of the cult of originality that still affects our ability to appreciate reproductive prints today. This is a scholar that Holtz is writing about, which
Diane de Grazia.
Which really,
I knew at the National
see,
Gallery.
that's, to me, this is great. And so it's interesting to go about, again, that's the concept of how do we study print collecting and how is it stored. So do you put all the original prints together? Do you say, here are all these prints done by all after great artists? That becomes a corpus? Or is it just, like, here's a bunch of neat pieces of paper with pretty designs? It's really a way of scaffolding value. But it wasn't nearly as stratified as we think now. That's reproductive. It's a Xerox. Like a giclée print. Okay? There you go. See? Yeah. What we've been talking about are not giclée prints. You didn't just go, print. So that concept of owning an idea really starts gathering credence with Rubens and getting cum privilege. You'll actually see it in the address that he has been given privilege to say, this is mine. I own the copyright to this image from royalty, whoever is in power.
But it's also, in a way, it's fascinating that it has to be written on it, because you don't see that written on paintings, do you?
No, but I do see people putting C on their little prints when they sign them sometimes. I'm like, really? Are you really going to do that?
Really?
Yeah. But so then that becomes, again, this whole, okay, the artist figured out cool systems to make things work, and that means that engraving only becomes used for reproduction, and it doesn't get to be all original unto itself until Hayter. So we'll go with that.
We'll get to Hayter.
This was the whole concept of Titian using a privilege once again to have the copyright on his Pharaoh crossing the Red Sea. Titian was a smart guy. There was a copyright on who all could sell this enormous image. The idea, though, that it's 1517, Titian's at the height of his powers. He's able to get this enormous woodcut out there. It's huge.
Yeah.
And that it has to be marketed.
It's 12 block. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
It's like a huck.
Yeah. We saw this. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's
48 by 87.
It's 4 feet by 7 feet.
Good Lord.
Of course he wants people to sell this. And it's showing 4 feet by 7 feet. It's 12 blocks, but it shows the scale of Titian. It also shows his wonderful slashing. It shows all the diagonals that he's inventing and ways of creating an image, unlike anything that was going on down in the Venetian way and the drama of Venetian paintings and their adoration of stirring, roiling nature. That's all of the Titian times. And he's no dummy. He's going to get it out there.
I love in this one, the 12, it's 3
blocks
by 4 blocks, and one of the ones in the middle is basically only waves.
Yeah, it really is
like
just
the
an abstraction.
Insomnians.
It is. Isn't that amazing? If you had to hand one to each student in the
Right.
classroom, it's like an exquisite corpse.
Yeah.
And so it really does tell you, almost like the rule of thirds, how do you compose an image? And Titian was no dummy. And Titian's image is being reproduced throughout the remainder of the century. He's still alive too. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, because here we have to talk momentarily about Cornelis Cort, who is doing images after Titian.
We're really getting into it.
It's some pretty messed up stuff right now. There's the martyrdom of St. Lawrence. Now his attribute is the grill. They roasted him, actually. Oh, go ahead, Anne. You're having some fun with this.
I just love these.
Why? Because they're so vivid.
Super vivid. This is the kind of print that I would have looked at in the vault, where I would have taken the loop and looked at these clouds and put that on my list of great
Clouds. Yeah. And that's the part, say Cornelis Cort is one of these northern reproductive, air quotes, printmakers doing a Titian. Now what he's actually doing, if I recall correctly, is he's conflating two Titians.
Oh.
And but Titian, an artist known for his colore rather than his disegno, sought a printmaker who could convey the less tangible atmosphere, color, and light for which his paintings were famed, and specifically commissioned this artist, Cort, to create engravings after several of his designs. So he's combining in this, again, the whole Titian, the diagonals, the slashing, the rising. I think of this kind of as a gateway drug for the Baroque, and certainly Mannerism are gateway drugs for the Baroque era. And here it is, but the thing that's the coolest about this is those clouds are all Cort's work. Cort is the one that really put it together. And so
I love that Titian is
I want
involved.
you
Yes.
to do this, because I know that you get my color in line.
And you're going to get my name out there.
Yeah, and the thing that's fascinating again is we've talked about the disegno versus colorito, and here's a perfect example. All you get is black and white, and yet I get enough of the colore here. There's a world of color in black and white when it's done well. And you can still see some Michelangelo-esque backs. Okay, so Titian had just died, but he had been this is how Cort made some of his fame. Now, briefly, we talked about our friend Goltzius. Now, here's the problem that's always bothered me about Goltzius. He's wonderful. We respect him, his mark, and how he adapts it, and how he's a chameleon. And we forget that he's, in so many cases, doing artwork after somebody. And I'm willing to let it go, because he's Goltzius. And that proves that at a certain point, so we know that the Four Disgracers were drawn originally by Cornelis van Haarlem, but it is Goltzius that makes them come alive for us. It's Goltzius that lets us have that. So I love this quote. A. Hyatt Mayer, he's so much fun to read. He's one of those original print scholars, said of Goltzius that he was the last professional engraver who drew with the authority of a good painter, and the last who invented many pictures for others to copy. Now that's brilliant, because Goltzius is a painter. In 1601, he puts down his bureau and he does nothing but paint from then on, which blows my mind. But yeah, he draws well, as good as any painter, because he's a painter. But then, yeah, I was watching students. You watched him a couple times.
Sure.
What was it like watching students try to copy a disgracer?
I think it was probably a good choice, because it's confined at least to a single figure in a circumscribed space. So you could at least get a hold of it.
But then if you have to transcribe that, and you realize that there's no way that Cornelis Kort had created that moire, the cross contour, the swells and the tapers that Goltzius figures out. And that's his. That's Goltzius's mark. And I think he's the first. I find it hard to think of him as a reproductive printmaker. But then another one of the popular ones was his Judith and Holofernes after Bartholomew Springer. And then this whole concept of
people did that because it was small
and a
they
tondo.
thought it would be easy.
Tondo, but it's also because her boobies are really matched the tondo very well. Yeah. Anyway, but the one that I think is also fascinating is the Farnese Hercules, that he goes to Rome. He goes incognito. He doesn't want to. He's in disguise because he doesn't want to have to make conversation with anybody. He doesn't want anybody to know who he is.
And his name is known.
Yeah, and not only it was okay because of his poor health and his desire to know more about the sculptures of Rome. He literally goes to Rome and he's hiding. He's just there to learn to draw these things, and he does that. So he goes to see the Farnese Hercules, and this is also fascinating because this other enormous classical sculpture was discovered, check this out, in 1546. Oh, boy. Another big new unearthed, hey. I love the fact that rather than showing us the front of it, he gives us that surprise around the back.
If I could own a Goltzius,
I would totally do this. Because it's also pretty cute. It's also, it said, where did I have it down here? The two figures looking up at the massive statue in the lower right corner of the engraving have never been satisfactorily identified. Perhaps, as was suggested by the 18th century Dutch artist and collector Cornelis Bruce van Amstel, they are a self-portrait and a portrait of the artist's stepson, Jacob Matham, who was also an engraver. I just hope it's the case. Wouldn't that be great? Yes. And they're like, whoa. Look at the little bitty heads like, whoa. And they're looking at the business side of Hercules, and we're looking at the massive back stuff. It's a perfect opportunity to see, even though he, in this case, mannerist, absolutely. Too many muscles, but I'm willing to accept them in this case. It's almost, okay. They could be there. You're right. I think, I'd live with this any day. That'd be a great bathroom print, wouldn't it? Oh, you should see Anne's face. I should she's
we didn't have this at the Baltimore Museum.
No, we had to do one from the front.
We had some excellent things of all kinds, but this is one I was always on the hunt for.
There's one from the front that's of another, and it's just this is the one. Look at these clouds.
It's not just Hercules, it's about the sculpture being discovered, and it's about the two artists on their tour through Italy, and it's like there's so many more layers to it.
And it has a tasty address, and even in the stone it's carved, it says Hercules, and then we have the address with all the tasty bits that need to tell us all about it. What a wonderful way to come home from your trip. And so he has picked up on what Kort may have started working out on the Titian repros, but man, Goltzius, we didn't talk about this one. I just had to throw this one by Springer, The Wedding of Cupid and Psyche. Another thing the Mannerists love is like, hey, let's do a whole lot more mythology, because then you get nudies and all kinds of lascivious wonderfulness.
Right. And this is Hendrick Goltzius.
Yeah.
Doing an engraving after a painting by Bartholomew
Springer, The Cupid and Psyche,
1587.
And so the subject derives from the 2nd century AD novel The Golden Ass by Apuleius, which tells the love story between Cupid, god of love, and Psyche, a beautiful mortal. The print depicts the conclusion of the story. After Psyche has been granted immortality, the Olympian gods honor the couple with a wedding feast. Come on, it's a great day on Olympus. Look at, they're all having a great time.
Those clouds crack me up.
These look like intestines going bleak, 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 bleak. But there's so much here. It's just craziness how much look at the wind, just literally being pewed out there. That's a very scary backside, but I don't care. And it's just, is this Mannerist or what? He's giving life to Bartholomew Springer's ideas, but you could look at those clouds and you go, oh, no, yeah, but Goltzius did that. It doesn't belong to anybody else. And to be able to make a mark like that and be remembered, that attests to the chameleon beauty of Goltzius. And we talked about, this is Meisterstücke, where he allows himself to be 6 different artists, emulating, but to show it's an unbelievable skill. It's like the best impressions done by somebody that's like the most convincing vocal impression of Bill Clinton or any of those kinds of things. Only in this case, you're managing to carve into copper with a mangled hand that you fell into a fire when you were 2. And he blows my mind. But his ability to synthesize, let's say Dürer and Michelangelo into his own print, brilliant. That reproductive, sure, but what a range.
I totally forgive Goltzius for being there's not, it doesn't even occur to me.
It's
that's
not
an issue.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's better than a cover band.
Absolutely.
So it may be that Chris Christopherson wrote this, but this recording by Goltzius is like that much better. So he pushes that limit, I think, as far as it can go. I don't know if we want to mention this, but the fact that reproductive printmaking has become such a big deal. There was this great exhibition. I was wondering if you could tell me anything that your son remembered from when you forced him to go to this exhibition, which is was it in London?
It's at the British Museum. They have an incredible print collection, and they have a nice gallery off to the side that they do great things in. And my son was traveling in London, and I was like, "Oh, don't miss the print." So I have to, but he did. But he didn't really say much. He just sent me some pictures like, "Hey, check this out."
Oh, he was doing due diligence?
Yeah.
But the thing that's so cool about it is that this is a whole show about art from the court of Rudolf II of Prague, of Rudolf II of Habsburg, and how he had amassed this astonishing collection and wanted reproductive prints of his paintings, his sculptures, all of his objects, his objets, and in doing so had created this most astonishing collection. It wasn't just of the art objects, but of the reproductive prints after the objects, which were also really quite remarkable. I think that this is going to be something we're going to get to enjoy more and more as the scholarship comes further along, is to understand how much the reproductive printmakers could do to improve on, let's say, a painting. Because in this case, it's impressive. Or being able...
Back up. Let's say what it is. So there's a painting by Titian. Is that Rudolph on his horse? No, Charles. Inspired by portraits of Rudolph's illustrious predecessor. Huh. Rudolph never saw the back, but this is interesting. But as emperor, he was...
of the Imperial Army.
Yeah, so Sadler...
Good luck figuring this out.
I know. This is why it gets... I think this is why people walk away from reproductive prints, not only because sometimes they get a little bit staid, but because you can't follow the thread.
Unless you're really devoted to it. But if you looked at this and you started saying, okay, how do you build the public persona of somebody and that we're supposed to follow?
So you've got a sitter trying to emulate the previous emperor, asking an artist to make a print after a painting of...
But while you're at it, remember that I need to look like I'm charging into the battlefield, but I've never set foot... I don't even know how to ride a goddamn horse, but don't I look great? But that's it's a spin frickin' doctor. It's no different than the nonsense they do on TV now. It's if you slow down, what was it, Nancy Pelosi, whatever they did when they slowed her down to make her sound drunk. Oh, it's the same manipulation of material so that you have a different impression of somebody. Right. We would never do that of Donald Trump, of course. I wanted to throw this one in here because Sadler was a big hit and Sprenger of Rudolph's court, but just looking at how these prints could be done. Here is I couldn't not put this in, Anne. It was a memorial portrait of Sprenger and his deceased wife, Christina Müller, which was being able to put all of these different ideas together. This concept of posthumous portraits and the living and all of the stage studio things together is like all of these snatches of different parts of reality. It blows my mind. That's an astonishing print.
It is. This is Ajita Sadler, who did a portrait of Sprenger and the memorial portrait of the wife next to him, but after Sprenger. So Sprenger did his own painting of himself and his deceased wife, and then hired Sadler to make a print of it because he thought that more people want, as an artist, crazy.
But look, I would.
Of course, I agree with you.
I would much prefer this,
but
frankly.
As an artist, to say,
make a print of this. It's the same thing as
a bag of chips.
It's just Raphael again. And this other thing that we start seeing, that the concept of portraiture is something that will be coming up on as well.
Yeah, we haven't seen that, have we?
It's going to be Van Dyke that really puts that on the map. It's so cool. It's something I was trying not to put in here but it's too cool. So you're going to have to...
Another topic.
So, the concept of the North versus the South, and the concept of the Protestant versus the Catholic, and the concept of how the Baroque art is the art of superlatives. And so, Anne, what's a superlative?
A superlative is a word that indicates the most of something, the highest, the best.
The biggest, the brightest, the heaviest, the boobiest, the nakedest. Or it could be the quietest, the smallest, the most timid. And so think of that, particularly using the art of the superlative when I think of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. But one could also say that the Dutch Baroque could be said to be almost the antithesis of that, the quietest and so on. So I use that when I'm trying to convey the difference between the North and the South to my students. I tend to use two signposts. And so if you're going to talk about what is Protestant Baroque, I think of Rembrandt, the guy that does the bourgeois, the middle class, the people from the town of Amsterdam, the everyday life, versus the aristocratic Baroque of Rubens, who was this incredible ambassador to the entirety of Europe, who was working for all the crowned heads of Europe. And so Rubens is a perfect example of the Catholic Counter-Reformation Baroque. And so I just wanted to set this out here because at some point there will be a quiz, and I'll ask you folks to realize that Rembrandt and Rubens did overlap a little bit. Rembrandt was born in 1606 and died in 1669. Rubens was born in 1577 and died in 1640. So there was an overlap there, and Rembrandt was well aware of Rubens and his use of prints and the reproductive printmaking. And he was looking at that, and if you get privilege, you have copyright for your image. So he really did look at what this big guy of the other side was doing. But Rubens was the classic.
So Rubens was in Antwerp.
Yep.
And so he's in the Catholic Spanish-ish.
Yeah, totally. Of Flanders, yep.
Of Flanders.
Because Spain controls Flanders. Right. And that's why there's those black collars and the big ruffs, just like in Spain. That very severe, dark, right. Yeah.
And Rembrandt's up north where things are Protestant and a little bit more
bourgeois.
Egalitarian.
Yes, much because it becomes the Dutch Republic. And so here I try to show the dividing line between the huge, the superlative, the enormity of the Catholic Counter-Reformation Baroque versus the Protestant. So we have to talk briefly, because we're getting very near the end now, about what Catholic Counter-Reformation goals would be. And so for my students, I break it down into things that are about as simple as it could possibly be.
First, let's
go
back for a second. So the Catholics were doing their thing. They were being nasty bad,
They were trying to get everybody back to the church.
So then Martin Luther goes the whole thing, and then the Catholics go, hey,
we got to get it back together. Now it's time. So they start the Catholic Counter-Reformation. There's a series of councils. The Council of Trent is one that is ongoing. How are we going to win people back? And what are we going to use? And some sources would say you do it with propaganda and with fear. You do it, you coerce them with things that are lovely, but you also make it so scary that they won't go away. And
that's a great way to keep people.
Hey, check it out.
Sorry.
Go look across the sea right now, shall we? But that's why we do art history, right? So Catholic Counter-Reformation, how do you inspire people to come back to the Catholic Church, which has all these hierarchies? It has a pope, it has archbishops, cardinals, blah, 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 all the way down. As opposed to the Lutherans who are like, you need to read the Bible.
Your relationship with God is yours.
That's up to you, and that's how it goes, and you will be forgiven because he has grace, and you'll be okay.
Right.
And the Catholics are like, no, we got to have all this stuff. And how do we make this happen? And how they make that happen is by creating the most beautiful churches that could ever be imagined, and the art that decorates those things. And so theatrical, illusionistic, emotional impact to heighten the experience of the viewer.
Well, they're playing on the sublime.
Absolutely. The dramatic storytelling to draw or lure the layperson back to the Catholic Church. Here you've got every sense being dazzled and delighted with the music, with the art, with the smell, the taste of the holy meal. Every sense is stimulated, and even the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, he feels the crackling fires of hell on his skin. He hears the moans of the people in hell to keep him considering keeping the path. And so these churches need to have these preludes to heavenly bliss. And so what I'm showing you here is the interior of a Catholic church, and then, oh, how cute, I put a little Rubens on the altarpiece there. Because Rubens, who has studied in Italy, he stayed in Italy for 8 years. He did Yeah, and his drawings of the Laocoon, by the way, are really pretty remarkable. And so the year he comes back, he gets this great, commission for an altarpiece. So the Raising of the Cross was commissioned, and it was in the Antwerp Cathedral. And that was what, 1608, 1610?
I'm not sure.
1610, let's say.
Okay.
And then a year later, he's given this other commission for the Descent from the Cross by the Guild of the Arquebusiers, the Gun Guild. What I'm showing Anne here is an altarpiece. But what you don't realize is that when you're looking at this picture, you'll see one little tiny bump right here. That's my head.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's 15 feet tall.
Oh, my.
So this enormous book, this altarpiece, is 15 feet tall. The figures are slightly larger than life size.
Right. So open, it must be 20 something.
Oh, yeah. It's ridiculously huge. And so the idea of the Catholic Counter-Reformation Church giving you things like the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, this sense-around sculptural tableau where the building is undulating and breathing towards you, and you, the viewer, are there, and you are taken into the moment. You're being brought from the here to the hereafter, and you're absolutely witnessing a spiritual epiphany, and it's all there.
Spiritual epiphany, my ass.
Totally, she's having a spiritual orgasm.
She's having an orgasm, period.
Because he's stabbing her with the fiery dart of God's love, and she's going, ah! And then if you read the passages from St. Teresa's, she talks about how the voice gives vent to small screams of agony. Oh, yeah, I'll give it all to you. No, I totally use that when I teach it. Ah! Yeah,
Yeah, it's worth seeing.
Pierced with the fiery dart of God's love. And her, but the idea of making you be present and be there. Rubens was that guy using all of these neat skills that he learned by drawing all of those Italian kinds of sculptures and whatnot to bring these ideas to the North. So here he is, lovely Peter Paul Rubens with his beautiful wife. You see the Spanish, the more austere, darker clothing and the big rough collars.
This is a painted portrait of the two of them, self-portrait.
Yeah, oh yeah, looking good. And himself at 50.
Oh, there you go.
Ain't he cute?
He's cute.
Yeah, he's cute. Now, when we would teach History of Prints together, we would show the one etching that is believed to be by Rubens' own hand. And it is a beautiful portrayal of St. Catherine in the Clouds, which is probably a vignette from a ceiling painting he'd done, I think, for, what was it, Whitehall or something like that, when he happened to be up in London. He was all of these places working for all of these different crowned heads. But it has the typical Rubenesque, very full, Rubenesque woman, ample chest,
Curvy.
Very curvy, with a wonderful, voluminous drapery whipping around her. St. Catherine's looking down of it from the heavens with her foot on the wheel of which she had been martyred. And it's just a lovely, beautiful, comely woman. But what we have to think about is how he is, like Goltzius, was a wonderful synthesizer of all kinds of things. So imagine this artist who is so well liked. He's an ambassador. He speaks several languages. He literally does these missions like from Spain and giving important letters and whatnot to Flanders. He's an amazing political figure and very well respected and very well liked. He's channeled his Michelangelo. He totally gets the whole Titian. Titian mixes his paint with blood, and Rubens totally picks up on that and the colorito of that and the movement, the flicker and the flurry of brush strokes that you would see with a Titian. He understands the incredible chiaroscuro that he would have seen in a Caravaggio kind of Baroque painting that spirals down into your space. And he also has a full understanding of classicism because he studied all the Carracci brothers, which I never talk about much because it's really...
yeah, we skipped the Carracci.
They're kind of boring.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry, everybody.
It's just there's no time.
There's no time to do it all.
However, I'm going to show you, okay, so 1609 is the Raising of the Cross for the Antwerp Cathedral. 1611 is the commission by the Guild of Arquebusiers for the Antwerp Cathedral of the Descent from the Cross.
Same church.
Same church. It's just a tad bit smaller. There's my head.
There's your head.
And there's Jeanette's head.
Oh, nice.
It's not...
As big.
It's plenty big. And Rubens is very pleased with this, and he knows that he wants to get that idea out there. And so he's got this pedigree. We understand that. And he's knowing all of the things I've just mentioned, the Northern Renaissance love of lighting and all of the different kinds of surface textures and mass and anatomy. He also knows that he wants to get the word out there. So he's going to get himself. He has to find the right engraver to turn his Descent from the Cross, this massive painting, into an engraving. And he works for quite a little while to find the right engraver. And the one he ended up settling on is a fellow named Lucas Vorsterman. And I think that this is a fascinating character that you need to get to know. What you're going to see is a portrait done of him by none other than Rubens' most famous pupil, Anthony van Dyck, who was also not a bad-looking dude. But I wanted to read you this interesting little passage on Vorsterman. The likeness of Rubens' most talented reproductive engraver, Lucas Vorsterman, conveys his troubled personality and helps explain the one recorded instance of outright hostility toward the much beloved Rubens, apparently an attempted assassination. Perhaps the compulsiveness and paranoia suggested in Van Dyck's portrait actually helped Vorsterman achieve such exacting results as in his Descent from the Cross after one of Rubens' Antwerp altarpieces. The cool elegance and psychological distance that appropriately characterizes Van Dyck's painted court portraits are absent from his portrait etchings. Instead, vigorous lines and imposing massiveness lend the sitters an immediate presence. And the reason I want to bring this up is I have to show in etching, I think this gives us our best chance to see what Rubens would have been like in etching. Van Dyck, Rubens' best pupil, I have to share it here. Came up with this idea for amassing portraits of all of the great artists of his time. Now,
Which is a completely weird and new idea. Vasari had codified.
Exactly.
But
here's Rubens' pupil, Van Dyck. And by the way, notice he's got a cute little beard thingy that comes out of the center of his chin. Oh, is that his Van Dyck beard? I wonder how we got that name. He's got his little Van Dyck. And the thing is that he has picked up from Rubens that wonderful bravura brushstroke, all of those things. I just love this story. So the frontispiece for this book of 100 portraits of the great thinkers, artists, and other people of his time, totally new. This concept of the portrait of the genius. The cover, the title page is Van Dyck himself. Van Dyck does the self-portrait, and I just have to have Anne take a good hard look. I adore this portrait so much. Look at this beauty. Look at this guy. Yeah, I know. Exactly. Very much like Whistler. Look up. He's kind of studly.
The stipple. Huh. Have we gotten to Rembrandt yet in these?
No, he's out next week.
Okay, so this is like as free.
It's autographic.
Yes. As we have seen
at all. And that's the thing. We see that one etching by Rubens, but he's busy making massive paintings. Van Dyck, he travels and does all this stuff. He does Charles I on horseback, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Artists are turning into a thing. I'm going to have them all be in a book. The iconography or the iconographie. But here is his self-portrait. And it is just a stunning, beautiful 3/4, just turning, looking over his shoulder at us. You can see the Rubens in that. Absolutely. And I want you to notice one thing, which is I just think adorable. I picked this up from the unfinished print, which was an exhibition at the National Gallery many years ago. See that one scratch in the plate that goes over his gorgeous mustache? Van Dyck does his self-portrait, but he turns it over to the other printmaker, to do all the rest of the stuff. And this is the way the frontispiece looks. So the other guy gets the etching, which is the face, and he adds. Now, I don't know if we can call that reproductive or what, but look at how he's bringing in all of the Roman helmets. He's bringing in the coats of arms of the Habsburgs. He's bringing in trumpets and all of the the text, the caduceus. That's reproductive. But the thing that I love about this, it's like I'm even trying to do some clouds, and they're not Goltzius clouds, but they're close. He never changes the scratch because the scratch was made by the master himself. He never burnishes it out. So here the self-portrait was done about 1640 by Van Dyck, and he died the following year. This book the finish was done in 1645. But so the idea of respecting him and putting him on a pedestal and putting him in this book with all of these other great artists, I wanted to throw that out there.
So he completed the heads of all of the artists, and somebody else filled in all of
I don't need to do the rest of that.
And the clouds and the whatever.
How different? Like, Rubens saying you can do the sleeves, you can do the trees. Exactly. How could he do 24 paintings of Marie de Medici in 4 years? It's because you're going to do I do the face and the hands, all the really good, the boobs. But, all right, so I wanted to bring that to your attention so that when you see this portrait of Vorsterman, You can see the frankness of it. And really, look at this is an unbelievably new kind of fresh portrait. This is the finished way it appeared and you can even see that the engrave. This is wild. Check this out. The engraver goes back in and fixes. He does the dash and the stipple for the background. I think he actually puts in a little extra, which is too bad because I don't think we need it. But that's that concept of the division of labor again, almost like the Formschneider.
Yeah, sure.
But this concept of the appearance of this engraver, to me, is really important. Because if you are the guy that has to translate a Rubens painting that's 15 feet tall with the most unbelievable color and light and shadow and transcendent pathos and sadness and the drooping of the form, and you have to synthesize it down into a smaller black and white image, maybe 18 by 24 max. And it even has its address. And it's with cum privilege. It's got the king's stamp that says, you own this. Vorsterman's the guy to do it. Because and this is with, get this, with Rubens supervising and retouching.
What?
Oh, he wants it a certain way.
Oh, wow.
It's just a very certain way. And so it's really an astonishing way of how he translates. These are intangible things to translate, but I think being able to show how much is accomplished to create these textures, volumes, masses, I don't think anybody had done it as well as Vorsterman up to this point, just ever at all. And Vorsterman is that highest class reproductive printmaker.
Yeah, so maybe it would be good to remind people that Vorsterman is looking at a huge, brightly colored, painted,
altarpiece,
volumetric altarpiece
in a church,
and translating it into line
in stipple, dots,
and dots, no tone, on a much smaller scale in black and white.
Yep, to the artist's specificity.
So that the lines have to describe paint strokes and
softness and atmosphere
and flesh
and air. The texture of the air, even as you move back into the landscape,
it's
eerie. That is reproductive printmaking on the highest. It's Goltzius, Vorsterman. But I wanted to give you this last little parting chapter on our Vorsterman guy because he's stuck in my mind. If you're the guy that has to work for Rubens and you have to translate something this enormous, and they need to see how huge this is, and to get it to fit onto this little plate, it's going to do something to you. Okay, here's the aside. What is the dimensions?
Size, 16 and 15/16, so 17 by 22 and a half.
I was right. Like essentially 18 by 24.
So now, if you're a crazy cataloger, no offense anyone who works at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but the artists listed, so when you have an artist block, you'll include the person who made the original painting, then you'll have you have the person who made the print, then you list the person after whose painting you've made it. But in this case it says, Lucas Emil Vorsterman, after Peter Paul Rubens, published by Lucas Emil Vorsterman.
Ufta.
The same guy. Dedicated, so he published it himself. Dedicated to Sir Dudley Carleton. Dedicated by Peter Paul Rubens. Dedicated to and dedicated by. It's a very, yeah.
See, that gets painful.
It does. It's nuts.
All right, so first we have to follow the Vorsterman. First, we have to follow the Vorsterman bit out, and then we're going to go to the last fleshy bit of Rubens. All right, but first, as we're looking at our Vorsterman's this is Linda Holtz, and it's just too good for me to not screw it up. His translation of the rich color and shimmering textures of the painting is truly remarkable. In the figure of Magdalene, seen from behind and kneeling, we can particularly appreciate his artistry. For the first time, an engraver has done justice to Rubens' painterly treatment of his subject. Contours are avoided. Rather, it is the juxtaposition of elaborately varied hatchings and other Buren marks that establishes edges, shadows, highlights, and textures. Vorsterman managed to convey saturation, intensity, of color rather than directly transcribing its tonality, lightness or darkness, with the Buren. What is darkest in the painting is not necessarily darkest in the print, e.g. John's robe. Instead, the printmaker has subtly allowed one tone to do in the print what tone and color do in the painting. Bring forms forward or back, and establish primary and secondary centers of interest. Rubens was pleased with Vorsterman's work. In a letter of 1619, he expressed his preference for a young man who is malleable and not too set in his ways, as opposed to a well-seasoned engraver. Tragically, however, Forstermann suffered a nervous breakdown and apparently assaulted Rubens in 1622. For a time, Europe was shaken by rumors of the painter's assassination, for he was not only an acclaimed artist, but an important diplomat as well. We wish we knew more about Forstermann's illness. The assault is all the more mysterious because Rubens seems to have been universally beloved. His diplomatic efforts were marked by a forthrightness that stands apart from the hornet's nest of 17th century politics. Forstermann himself seems to have emulated him early in their association. How much Rubens' exacting standards contributed to the episode, coupled with Forstermann's own perfectionism and the inherent difficulty of the task, we will never know. The vocation of engraving may have had an innate appeal for compulsive or obsessive types. You think? Let's ask Mr. Goltzius. He's like, I'm done. One other thing I needed to bring to your attention was that Rubens wasn't a snob. He didn't only appreciate engravings, but he also appreciated woodcut. And the last is just to give you a taste of his Garden of Love, which is a glorious painting of he and his second wife, Helene Fourmont, in front of essentially what is the facade of Rubens' house. It's very nice in Florence, in Antwerp. Have you seen it? Oh, this is the front entrance. And there's a whole garden of beautiful, lovely ladies who are comporting themselves the way that women who wish to be loved should be. And it's, if you look here in the lower left-hand corner, a little cupid going, go, have some, yay, be in love, yay. They're pushing Helene on the backside, getting him in there. And over here on the fountain, you can see Charity is busy oozing forth, not oozing, I'd say jetting forth from her breasts, the milk of human love and kindness, but she's now a fountain. Psh. See that? And the cupids are all very heavy cupids, which could do some damage if they fell on you. But it's this big, lovely, busty garden of earthly delights, whom Rubens says, I'm going to find the right woodcutter to get this. And he settles on Christopher Jaeger, who is the best woodcarver for the task. And Jaeger actually has to work from two different drawings to get this together. So there is each half is slightly different in size than the other, but they do ultimately hook up. But to be able to see Rubens being translated into woodcut is fascinating. Yeah. And if you think about it, it's Rubens' Garden of Love in woodcut, which is affordable. And it's not going to be nearly as expensive. It's so smart. Again, this is a diplomat, beloved, a wonderful guy who knows how to, this just one half of it. Take a look at this tasty image of these beautiful women and their buxom selves cuddling and muddling and doing what they need to do to be in love. I just can't believe I'm seeing woodcut baby bumps that are so squeezy and fleshy and delightful. And then if we look in the right half to see Rubens, his lovely wife, being escorted through the landscape, it's quite something to understand what it was to have a wood carver be able to put together all of those lessons and have it work out with such spirit and brio and be in love and to communicate that in so many ways.
And the block, I just looked up the left sheet on the Met's website. It's 18 by 23. Big.
So you'd end up
together, 40.
Yeah. Yep. I would own that.
Yeah.
It's actually a 4 foot across. The original painting is in the Prado, but to see them together and to see how Christopher Jaeger, his name is on it, because this is totally sanctioned by Rubens. And Rubens has given his approval for this reproductive print. I get an enormous pleasure out of looking at how saturated and Titianesque and all of these colors are, but to see that the vitality of it and the scrumptiousness of it, of the women, is conveyed in black and white quite well. And I use it as an opportunity for students to understand what the concept of beauty was in 1638, as the full fecund woman who can give forth many babies and have soft, wonderful breasts that you can do the motorboat into, compared to some scrawny little heroin junkie kind of skinny person packed into their tiny little dress clutching their phone. I used to think that Rubens' women were just dreadful. I thought they were awful until I learned the truth. And it happens when you grow 30 years older and realize that gravity works and people turn into, women tend to look like their mothers, and that it's actually far realer than Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and that you're going to get more flies with honey than with vinegar. And Rubens gives that to you. But if you don't behave, you can certainly get punished. So the last image for the day is Hercules triumphant over Discord, which is another woodcut done by Christopher Jaeger for Rubens. And in the 1630s, Rubens, okay, I want you to do this. Another enormous woodcut. But here we have Hercules. Here he's back. And he is beating the snot out of Discord, which is a buxom woman who is envy also. And basically, you're going to get put down if you can't be nice. So this really teaches you to be on the good side. See, here we have the Hercules with extraordinary force, his astounding musculature, taut flesh, veiny arms and ankles, knotty wooden club, and wild expression. God, it looks like the Laocoon beating down Discord, someone that doesn't get along with him.
This is not a great message.
No, but it is certainly Baroque.
I know.
Be in love and you'll be happy.
Beat up a woman. Nice.
No, it's Discord. It's envy.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not a woman. Yeah, I know, right? That's the problem of the Rubens woman.
Yeah.
Be in love. Be nice. Be pretty. It'll be good.
Yeah.
Don't be that.
Don't speak.
But at the same time, what a great composition.
No, it is a great. I agree with you. It is.
But I know we don't have to agree.
No, it's just like suddenly I tuned in that I had never looked at her as a female figure before. I mean, I see the boob, but in all that time we looked at this in class, I was like,
He totally has his foot on her face.
Yeah, no, I see.
It's gnarly.
Yeah.
It's really rough. You could say trigger warning.
Yes.
You really could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now here, I would say, yay.
Yeah.
Kegger, fun. It's not that Rubens can't. I think he knew his audience is what I think.
It's the patriarchy.
There you go. He knew his audience.
Yeah.
But he also did marry that second wife when she was 17.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's how it goes. But we can't cancel everything.
No.
Because it's valid and it does its thing. And
It's all...
I still feel badly for Lucas Worstermann. Maybe he just had it with those women getting... Who knows? Anyway, so I just enjoy the dirt now and then. I don't want to be like Rona Barrett's Hollywood. Lucas Worstermann went whippers and beat up... So here's one last little tidbit of bait. I have one comparison of the Rubens Descent from the Cross and Rembrandt's autographically reproductive version. And I'm using that as bait to say in the not too distant future, we'll probably be talking about Rembrandt.
To which we've already devoted 4 hours.
Then let's talk about Kello.
No, but yes. Can we touch on Rembrandt and his reproductiveness?
Sure, because there's a reason. It's the Bailey.
Okay.
I have to talk about what they did to him in the 18th century.
Yeah.
Okay. But just because I really look at these two pole stars. One is the bourgeois Baroque, one is the aristocratic Baroque, and each of them, in their own way, with their superlatives, are doing their job. But ultimately...
That's the Rubens and the Rembrandt. Yeah.
And then... But we do get a whole episode on Kello, who also made it into Van Dyck's iconography. He did a portrait of him too.
Okay.
So you have to thank Rubens and Van Dyck for figuring out how portraiture would be.
Yeah, no, it's useful.
It's useful. It could also be that artists are turning into cool things. Or maybe they're just turning into jackasses that get a lot of money and can treat women badly.
It's a whole new industry's been born, and the rules of the road are still morphing. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But Rubens got privilege. He got royal privilege. He got white privilege. He got male privilege.
He sure did.
He got artistic license.
He was all that.
None of those things that existed, really, for an artist.
He was smart.
Yeah, why don't you reproduce that?
He was like his era's Dürer. He knew the...
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yep. Totally. Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any punchy way to end this episode except thanks for listening, y'all, and catch you next time.
Thank you for joining True and me for a history of Western prints. This was the concluding episode of 4 parts of reproductive prints. We'll circle back to them later when they morph into something else a bit later on. So we'll circle back. Thank you to True, as always, for being an amazing historian and friend. And a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Next, the episodes will start becoming singular artist episodes. The next episode we'll cover is Jacques Callot. We might tag on Claude Mellon at the end of that one, so stay tuned. All right, we'll see you next time.